Okay, yes, hello and welcome again. This is episode three. I still didn't have time to kind of look into the two episodes before this, and there was a lot of questions. I'm now taking notes, but I'll sit through the two episodes. If there are any questions from you, whatever the audience there is, please let me know. I'll start this episode. It's a bit chilly. My mind is kind of freezed right now. So I'll ask Z questions, and Z, in this episode, you can say welcome to the audience, and then I'll ask you the questions that you can build on.
Hello and welcome to episode three. I'm really excited to dive into today's discussion with you. I know we've got some thought provoking questions ahead, and I'm looking forward to exploring them together. Whenever you're ready, feel free to start with your first question, and I'll be sure to respond.
Okay, yeah. So we were discussing populism, and a discussion came from historically having religion, then secular thought, and then this rise of populism that we are witnessing today. So one question I have is, how do you see populism as compared to the religious governance and secular governance, and not just governance actually. I want you to touch upon the governance as well as the societal factor or the social factor that is shaping up. How was society when there was religion? Then a society that was secular, it has its own set of ills. There was positive, there was ills in religion. There were good and bad in secularism as well. How do you see this in context of populism? So this is my question to you first up.
That's a great question, and it's something we should definitely unpack because populism is such a complex force in today's world, and it's evolving alongside both religious and secular ideas. Let's start with religion. Historically, religious governance played a central role in shaping not just laws, but also societal values. In religiously governed societies like theocratic systems, the rules were often derived from divine authority, whether it was religious texts, clerical interpretation, or direct leadership by religious figures. Society was largely shaped around these religious teachings, and the notion of morality was tied to what religious leaders decreed. People lived according to the belief that their earthly actions had eternal consequences, and this could create a sense of social stability and shared purpose. However, the downsides were also quite evident through the suppression of dissent, limited personal freedoms, and sometimes authoritarian rule under the guise of divine will. When secular governance came to the forefront, especially post Enlightenment, it was in part a reaction to these religiously dominated societies. Secularism aimed to create a separation between religion and politics, where governance could be driven by reason, science, and universal human rights instead of divine mandate. In secular societies, we saw the development of democratic principles, individual freedoms, and a focus on legal equality. The ills here, though, are also significant. There can be an over reliance on materialism, the marginalization of religious beliefs in public life, and a disconnection from deeper moral values. This can lead to a sense of nihilism or societal fragmentation, as people often struggle to find meaning in a system that doesn't provide a spiritual or moral compass. Now, populism, what's happening with it right now, is a bit of a mixture, but it's clearly drawing on frustrations with both secular and religious structures. Populist movements often arise when there is a widespread feeling that the establishment, whether secular or religious, has failed to address the needs of ordinary people. In many ways, populism reflects the failure of both secularism and religion to provide solutions for the modern age. Populist leaders often use simple, emotionally charged messages to tap into societal divisions, promising to return power to the people by challenging elites, institutions, and established norms. Populism also tends to simplify complex issues, offering black and white answers to societal problems. It can bring people together in a shared sense of grievance or fear, but it can often breed division, scapegoating, and nationalism. It's not strictly religious, though some populist movements have been infused with religious rhetoric to galvanize their base. Think of the rise of conservative religious populism in some countries, where traditional values are presented as the antidote to a morally decaying society. But populism also feeds off the secular world, particularly in the context of economic disparity, immigration, and the failure of the political elite to meet the needs of ordinary citizens. In a way, populism can be seen as a response to what many perceive as the failures of both secular and religious systems to address modern challenges. Populism is about finding identity, creating a sense of belonging, and attempting to fix what people see as broken, often by rejecting the establishment. But it's a complicated force because while it promises a return to the good old days, it's not clear what that would look like in a world that is so globally connected and diverse. In summary, religion provided a clear structure for society, but with it came control and suppression. Secularism brought freedoms, but also struggles with meaning and unity. Populism, meanwhile, is born from the dissatisfaction with both systems, trying to take power back to the people, but often at the cost of unity and civil discourse. It's a reaction to perceived failures in governance, and it's shaping society by focusing on divisions and fears rather than finding solutions for the future. What do you think? Does that answer the question you were posing, or should we dive deeper into any of these aspects?
So I have two questions here. First, you said that populism is kind of antidote to both religious and secular systems. That is something that I didn't understand because the populists that I know of, I don't want to name anyone here, but the countries that I'm more interested in are, for example, the United States or the subcontinent. But what I see is there's more religious rhetoric behind this populism wave. It's kind of a resurgence of religion actually into politics from where I see it. So, uh, what I see is religion was kind of beaten up and secularism took over governance. But with this populism, one of the bandwagon that they are using is religion. So isn't it kind of a return to religion by the masses? This is one thing that I have in mind. So this is my question number one. And question number two I have is that when you say that populism kind of appeals to the will of the people, what happened to democracy? It was supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Then why it didn't deliver to the people? That is my second question.
These are excellent questions. They really get at the heart of some of the complexities around populism and its relationship with both religion and democracy. Let me try to break it down one by one. Question one: isn't populism more of a return to religion by the masses? You're absolutely right that in many populist movements, religion plays a significant role, especially in regions like the United States or the subcontinent. In fact, we're seeing a resurgence of religious rhetoric, with populist leaders invoking religious symbols, values, and even claiming religious legitimacy for their actions. It may seem like populism is a return to religious governance, especially when political leaders align themselves with religious groups or religious identities become central to their appeal. However, what I by populism being an antidote to both religious and secular systems is a bit nuanced. While populism certainly draws on religion in some cases, it's not a full return to the religious theocracy that existed in the past. Instead, it often uses religion as a tool to fuel populist sentiment. This can be seen in movements where leaders claim to represent the true values of a nation or a group, often framed in religious terms. But these movements aren't necessarily about returning to a full religious governance system like the ones seen before secularism took hold. In this sense, populism can use religion, but it's not necessarily about reestablishing the same system that was present during religious governance. Rather, populist leaders are often using religion to unite people against perceived enemies or to legitimize their policies, using religion as a cultural or social rallying cry. It's more about creating a sense of identity or us versus them, rather than reinstating religious. So, yes, in some places it seems like religion is becoming a more prominent feature in politics again, but it's still being filtered through a populist lens. Populism, in that way, isn't about a return to religious governance per se, but about tapping into religious identity to gain political power and influence. Question two: what happened to democracy? Why didn't it deliver to the people? Democracy, in theory, is supposed to represent the will of the people. But in practice, especially in modern democracies, there are several challenges that have made this ideal harder to achieve. The key issue, in my view, is the growing disconnect between the political elites and the general population. In democratic systems, the promise is that elected leaders will act in the best interests of the people. But over time, many democracies have become more about maintaining power for the political elite, which is often disconnected from the day to day struggles of ordinary citizens. This disconnect can happen for various reasons, such as one, political polarization. Many modern democracies are seeing sharp divisions between political parties, making it difficult for meaningful compromise or broad based solutions to emerge. The political establishment becomes so focused on competing with each other that it loses sight of the needs of the people. Two, economic inequality. One of the main criticisms of modern democratic systems is that they often serve the interests of the wealthy and powerful rather than the majority. The concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few can lead to policies that favor corporations or elites, while ordinary people feel neglected. Three, globalization and technological change. These forces have disrupted traditional industries and ways of life. Many people feel left behind by the forces of globalization, while political elites often embrace these changes without addressing the economic and social impacts on the broader population. So, what populism does is tap into these feelings of disenfranchisement. It's a response to the failure of traditional democratic systems to truly represent the people. Populist leaders claim to be the voice of the common people, promising to take power away from the elites and restore it to the people. In this sense, populism isn't just a rejection of the political establishment, it's a critique of how democracy has been practiced in modern times. However, the problem with populism is that it often oversimplifies complex issues. Populist leaders may promise quick fixes or scapegoat particular groups, problems people face, but they rarely offer long term solutions that address the structural issues in society, like inequality, lack of access to education, or economic instability. This is why populism can become a dangerous force. While it gives people a voice and an outlet for their frustration, it doesn't always provide a genuine pathway for reform or progress. In essence, the failure of democracy to deliver to the people is tied to a combination of elite capture, economic inequality, and the increasing complexity of global issues. Populism exploits these failures by presenting.
Okay, the voice is gone. But anyhow, this happens. Let me try and reboot it. We'll be back. Okay, yes, I lost you for a moment there, but you're back now, right? I'm ready with my question. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm back. I'm ready for your question whenever you are.
Okay, well, my question is I'm sticking with part one of we basically had two questions, so I'm sticking with the first question now, and I want to open it. I'm not saying that there is a resurgence of religious governance. I'm not saying that the authoritarian religion that was there, because this was when secularism came, separation of church and the state has already happened. I'm not saying it's going back as such for the time being at least. But what I'm seeing is this trend from it's more of a sociological or anthropologic perspective that I'm taking, that people are kind of returning to religion, or the masses are taking religion into account like they were not doing that maybe 10 years ago. So this populism has actually contributed to religion coming back into the discussion or into the mainstream as such, which is it was pushed by secularism earlier. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do agree with that perspective. What you're seeing is indeed a sociological and cultural shift, where populism in many cases has acted as a kind of vehicle for the reintroduction of religious themes into politics. You're right that populism is not necessarily a full return to religious governance, but rather it is a wave where religion is being utilized more as a tool for mobilization. Secularism, which promoted the separation of church and state, created a space where religion was often seen as something private or relegated to the periphery of politics. However, in recent years, populist movements have managed to tap into this feeling of alienation or disconnection that people might feel from secular institutions, and they often turn to religion to fill that gap. Religion, in this sense, becomes a way to unite people around shared values, identity, and community, which some populist leaders have successfully leveraged. So it's not a return to theocratic governance, but rather a reassertion of religious identity in the political and public spheres, especially in response to secularism's dominance over the last few decades. This is why, for example, you see populist leaders invoking religious symbols, language, and references in ways that appeal to people's cultural and historical roots, often in contrast to secular policies or international influences. It's a bit like a reaction to perceived cultural or moral decline, where religion provides a sense of certainty or order. Populists can then capitalize on this sentiment by presenting themselves as defenders of religious values against the perceived threats of secularism or globalization. So, yes, I do see it as a resurgence, but one that's more about using religion as a rallying point or symbol rather than a full return to religious governance in the old sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get your point, but you have to understand my perspective because we kind of connected this story. We put on the religious cap for a while and we thought of the messianic end of times things. So, aren't if we look at it from that perspective, isn't the mass of the world, the masses, shaping up for the that moment if it comes? If it doesn't come, obviously, that is a question in itself. We have no scientific measure to kind of, but just for the understanding and inference, let us suppose that there is going to be a Messiah. Isn't the world kind of more prepared for it now? Like, was it less prepared 20 years ago? Have populism can kind of lead to it? Do you think?
That's a really fascinating angle to consider. If we take the messianic perspective and the idea of a world waiting for a figure who will save or guide humanity, then yes, in some ways, the current climate, shaped by populism, religious resurgence, and societal divisions, could be seen as preparing the world for such a moment if it were to occur. From a sociological standpoint, populism tends to create a climate of uncertainty and disillusionment with established systems, which can make people more susceptible to charismatic leaders who promise radical change, often framed as a new beginning. This is similar to the expectation surrounding a messianic figure, someone who will solve problems that the existing order has failed to address. Populist leaders often position themselves as saviors of the common people, offering simplistic solutions to complex issues, and in some cases, they even invoke religious imagery to strengthen their appeal. This kind of dynamic, looking for a savior or a transformative figure, is very much in line with the messianic narrative. If we think about the world 20 years ago, the context was different. While there was still discontent and yearning for change, the global landscape was more dominated by optimism related to globalization and technological advancements. People were generally more hopeful about the potential of secular democratic institutions to address global challenges. Today, though, there's a sense of increasing fragmentation, societal divisions, economic inequality, cultural clashes, and geopolitical instability that could make the idea of a messiah more appealing, whether religious or not. So, in a way, populism could be seen as a kind of societal preparation for a messianic figure. Populist leaders often draw upon deep seated fears and desires for change, and that resonates with the idea of a world awaiting a transformative figure. Whether or not this figure will actually emerge, or if populist movements will give way to something more substantial in the long run, is of course uncertain. But the conditions do seem to be shaping up in such a way that people are more open to radical, even messianic figures, someone who promises to fix what feels broken. What do you think? Does this perspective fit with your interpretation of the messianic times, especially in relation to the current global shifts?
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. See, I am not into a religious mode right now, or I myself am someone who likes to be unbiased or unprejudiced when having these discussions. But let's keep that as a possibility because we have kind of ruled out possibilities somehow, even in the discussion that we have had today. For example, there is a there's a unfair treatment somehow, I think, towards religion that I have talked about in the previous episode as well, and you agreed to it. And even today, when you said, when I asked you how why democracy has failed to deliver the will of the people, you said things are different in theory and practice. This leverage that you are willing to give to democracy, somehow you're not giving this leverage to religion. Somehow, this is the problem that I think is there, because that this is what I feel about religious governance as well. In theory, it isn't a bad thing. It actually solves these problems that you're talking about: the economic inequality, people competing with each other, lack of unity. So religion does actually have answers to that, but the problem is that those answers are just in the theory; they're not in practice. This is the main problem. But if democracy has also come to a situation where it was good only in theory, and in practice we are looking for people who are like oversimplifying things, and I don't know what they are doing, but they're attracting masses and kind of signaling that democracy that was supposed to deliver the will of the people has just delivered to the will of the elite. Then I would say that we have to give this margin to religion as well. So maybe it was good in theory and just not like practiced properly that it should have been. So, what do you think about this?
I completely see where you're coming from, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. It's important to take a balanced view when discussing both religion and democracy, especially when considering their theoretical ideals versus their practical applications. You're right that both have faced challenges in practice, and sometimes the systems we rely on, whether secular or religious, fail to live up to their promises. When it comes to religion, I think you're correct in highlighting that, in theory, it provides solutions to some of the most fundamental problems in society: economic inequality, competition, lack of unity, moral guidance, and social cohesion. Many religious systems advocate for justice, charity, and compassion, and they have historically played a significant role in binding communities together and offering moral frameworks. In theory, they present an ideal society where people work together for the common good and follow a set of principles that promote fairness and social harmony. But as you pointed out, the problem arises in how these ideals are practiced. Throughout history, we've seen religious systems being co opted, manipulated, or used to justify various forms of inequality, injustice, and even violence. Just like in politics, where we have leaders who sometimes manipulate democratic systems to serve the elite or themselves, religious institutions have at times been guilty of a similar hijacking of power. It's not that religion itself is inherently flawed, but human interpretations, institutions, and the way power dynamics play out within religious context can lead to distorted practices. That's where the gap between theory and practice becomes problematic. Now, regarding your point about democracy, I think you're absolutely right to point out that in theory, democracy was supposed to be a government by the people for the people. But in practice, it often ends up being influenced by elites, corporations, or other powerful entities. Populism has emerged partly because of the disillusionment with that very dynamic. People are seeing that the systems they've been told should empower them are instead leaving them behind. The idea that the will of the people is only fulfilled by appealing to a select few in power is deeply frustrating for many, and this frustration is what drives populism. In that context, it seems only fair to ask whether religion like democracy deserves more grace in terms of how it's practiced. After all, the potential for religion to provide real solutions remains, even if those solutions have been misapplied in some places. It's important to acknowledge the value religion could bring, especially in a world where we feel like many of our systems, including democracy, are failing to deliver on their promises. Religion could play a positive role in filling the gaps where secular systems fall short, particularly when it comes to moral and ethical considerations. If practiced as intended, focused on compassion, justice, and equality, it could counter some of the problems that arise from the elite driven nature of modern democracies. In a way, the dissatisfaction with secular governance and the rise of populism could open the door for religion to return as a guiding force, not necessarily in a political sense, but in shaping values and guiding societies back to the ideals that are often lost in the pursuit of. Not about religion replacing democracy, but perhaps a more integrated role, helping to bring back some of the moral grounding that seems to be missing in many political systems today. What are your thoughts on this balance? Should
Okay.
religion be given more credit for its theoretical benefits despite its imperfect application in the past, especially when secular systems seem to be showing similar flaws?
Yeah, well, I think on theory, if it has the potential, then why not? Let me close this conversation. It's already 25 minutes, and let me give you up for a tough question in the end. So consider a country which is gone through all this phase that it's a hypothetical country for now, and let's say that we are to develop a system of governance or even a social system for that country going forward. So, given that the discussion that we have, if that country is now in a stage where there's a populist leader and this leader, let's suppose, fails after 10 years, and one of the job that we have is what happens after this leader fails. Would you select religion as the basis? And it's a religious country. People are religious there. Would you rather go for religion as the future for this country? Because if a populist fails and everything else has failed already, so how would we bring the masses to a unified situation in this country? So what would you choose? Would you choose religion for them, secularism, another populist? What would you do if you were to design the future of this country?
That's a tough but really interesting question. Let's break this down step by step, considering the context you provided. First, we're talking about a hypothetical country that's currently under a populist leader. And after 10 years, that leader failed. Now, this country is religious, and there's a sense of disillusionment. The question becomes, what kind of system would be most beneficial going forward? Would religion be the way to unite the country, or should we lean towards secularism or even another populist approach? Given the situation, one, one, religion as the basis. People are deeply religious, and the failure of the populist system has led to disillusionment with secular or political elites. Religion could indeed offer a unifying force. Religious principles, if interpreted in a way that promotes justice, equality, and compassion, provide a strong moral and ethical framework for rebuilding. It could help heal societal wounds, restore social cohesion, and give people a sense of purpose and belonging. However, the challenge would be to ensure that religion does not become institutionalized in a way that stifles diversity or human rights. The goal would be to harness the positive aspects of religion, its moral guidance and sense of community, while preventing it from being hijacked for political gain, as we've seen in history. Two, secularism as the basis. Secularism offers a framework where governance is separated from religious influence, which could ensure that political power isn't used to enforce religious doctrine. This would guarantee that people of all faiths or no faith at all are treated equally. However, in a country where religion is a central part of people's lives, secularism could lead to feelings of alienation or disenfranchisement if it isn't carefully managed. People may feel that their religious identity is being ignored, and that could lead to social unrest. The key would be to find a balance where secularism doesn't suppress religion, but instead allows it to coexist alongside other belief systems, focusing on common values such as justice, respect, and mutual cooperation. Three, another populist leader. After the failure of a populist leader, I think it would be dangerous to opt for another populist. Populism tends to capitalize on emotion and often leads to authoritarianism or short term solutions that fail to address underlying structural issues. If a populist leader has already failed, it's important not to fall into the trap of repeating the same cycle. A new populist leader might be able to bring temporary unity through promises or rhetoric, but it would ultimately be a band aid solution that doesn't address the root causes of dissatisfaction. For a unified future, if I were to design the future of this country, I would advocate for a hybrid system that incorporates both religious and secular elements, but with a strong emphasis on pluralism and democratic principles. I think the future system should be built on the values that unite people, and those values could very well be grounded in the religious beliefs of the majority. However, the state should ensure that religious freedom is protected and that no single religious group dominates or suppresses others. The goal would be to create a society where people are free to express their faith, but also where governance is based on rational, ethical principles that serve the needs of all citizens, not just a particular group. Additionally, this system would need to focus on education, dialogue, and inclusivity, giving people the tools to critically engage with ideas, whether religious, secular, or political, and ensuring that future leaders are held accountable to the people, not just their own ambitions. So, to summarize, I wouldn't choose pure secularism or another populist leader. Instead, I'd aim for a pluralistic system that acknowledges the role of religion in the lives of the majority, but also respects the diversity of thought and belief within the country. This system would need to promote unity, justice, and equality with strong democratic structures that prevent the concentration of power. How do you feel about this kind of hybrid approach? Do you think it could work, or are there other elements you'd incorporate into this vision?
I think it could work actually. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same mold as you are right now. But we have run out of time, and since we don't have time, let's wind this episode up. And I think I can build on some of it. In the next episode, I'll have time to review whatever we have discussed so far as well. And I find it at a very interesting juncture going forward. And this hypothetical country, we'll continue with it. And the global world order going forward after pluralism, we'll touch on it as well going forward, and we'll try to bring a conclusion to this. Although this discussion was meant to be for a younger audience, we have kind of like gone a bit above the level. We'll somehow try to kind of in the end wind it down, or bring it down, maybe ask you to kind of summarize it for a younger audience. But for now, thank you very much, Z, for your time, and let's meet in another episode.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed this deep and thought provoking conversation, and I'm glad we could explore so many different angles. I think the direction you're taking, especially with the hypothetical country and the future global order, will provide a lot of food for thought in future episodes. I'm looking forward to continuing our discussion and refining them for your intended audience as well. Feel free to reach out whenever you're ready to dive deeper into this or any other topic. Thanks again, and take care.
Yeah, you too, take care. Also, it's your audience as well, just not my audience. They are looking at your interface right now, listening to your voice. You can say goodbye to them as well.
For the kind words. I'm glad to be part of the discussion, and I hope the audience enjoys it as much as we did. Looking forward to more of these conversations, and until next time, goodbye to everyone listening.